Hi, Humanities 4141. Today we're talking about disconnected, and now we're on the chapter that deals specifically with property. So, a couple quick words about this chapter. First off, I thought that it was clearly James's most positive chapter so far to date in dealing with young people and technology. We have a discussion here, especially towards the end on page 71, where James suggests that we can't just look at issues around property and say, oh, it's kids just being kids. In fact, we can't even just dismiss the technology as being the reason why we find ourselves in this predicament where there is such a large disconnect, or we find these gaps. The ethics gap between the actions and the ethics of young people. So instead, James suggests that the problem actually falls to adults in this case, and that a larger role needs to be played by adults in not only in parenting and in policy, but also in just sort of explaining to young people through their individual everyday actions, what gives and what doesn't. So I want you to take that up when we get to your part of what we're doing. But let's take a look at then this idea around property and how property works online, and why this matters for network publics, for young people, and for in particular children's rights, I guess, which is what this course continually comes back to. What role do children get to play in the decision-making processes when those decisions directly affect their own lives? If we look at democracy in its entirety, if we look at rights and human rights and civil rights in particular, so political rights for individuals and not just for children, one of the core problematics of this is property ownership. And what I mean by that is nothing is more central to democracy, to the growth of democracy, and to the implementation of democracy across the global scale over the last 300 years than property and property ownership. To own property is to have political rights, and at least historically that is how it's always been. To be enfranchised, to have the ability to vote, to have say in your government has always been, at least historically until the middle of the 20th century, directly tied to property and property rights. Now, James speaks nothing about this in James's chapter, but it is very interesting that property is a core component of exploring young people's digital lives and their interactions in digital spaces. When again, who owns what? Property ownership, property access, and is again tied to decision-making access. And even in the online space, we see this as we talk about who owns what information. It's also interesting to note that James points out on page 59, one of the core ideas of young people in digital spaces is that copying is the new normative online, or copying is normative online, and it's part of sort of everyday regular practice. Another idea worth taking up maybe is that legal and ethical are not the same thing. So what is legal or considered legal or illegal is not necessarily the same thing as what is ethical or not ethical. We get that on page 52. So we have a gap then in online actions with young people between what young people see as ours, or what we get to have ownership of, and what property belongs to us, and theirs, what property belongs to them. There's a gap there's a disconnect between ours and theirs, and the thinking around it. And this disconnect is reflected not only in the actions of young people, but also in the legal policy around ours and theirs online, and in the ethics. And remember, legal and legality and ethical thinking are not the same thing online. And this, of course, is even more complicated by remixing and how remixing adds to these issues. So I'll give you a couple real quick examples of this as it shows up in online learning, something what we're doing right now, which may add to your understanding of it. I saw a former student the other day, and we were talking, we bumped into each other in a public space, and we were talking, and he's explaining to me how, we were talking about plagiarism issues. I don't know how this subject came up, and he was saying how in fourth year once he got in trouble for plagiarism because he submitted the same essay to two different courses. So he had a third year course, and they were similar but different. One was in political science, I believe, and one was in children's studies. And he submitted the same essay into both classes. And he didn't understand why he was up for issues of plagiarism, because he had written the essay. They were both his essays. It was his essay. It was his writing. It was his thinking. It was his original thought. It was his production. And so why then should he be penalized by the university if, for example, he has the opportunity to display it or publish it in two separate spaces? Very complicated. Here's a second one for you, and you'll recognize this in this course where there's not a lot of essay writing. One of the reasons why we don't get a lot of essay writing in this course is because of the easy availability for students to purchase essays, to buy essays from other places. And in an online learning environment where there's not face-to-face interaction or regular interaction between yourselves and me, where I don't really get to know you as individuals and as people if all you ever submit is written form. So it's actually easier for students, and many students in the online environment, environment to what we would say legally cheat, or maybe ethically cheat. I'm not sure which one it is, or maybe it's both, to go out somewhere else and get someone else to do the work for them online, where there is maybe less roads of accountability or less access points for catching violators who go against it. And the last thing maybe here is also the idea of reusing assignments and reusing notes. So in fourth year, going back and borrowing notes from other students who have taken this course before, other courses before. There are plenty of websites that are out there where you can get other people's notes and you can get their postings, and you can reuse those if you have a different TA and so forth. So the idea of borrowing from some work that someone has already done before, maybe fixing it up a little bit and then submitting it as your own, although clearly you didn't take the notes or you didn't have that original thought process. You just took it and adjusted it and made it your own before turning it in. So this is a big reason why in this course you see every single week I ask you to come in front of the camera and to share your ideas in a visual format. It removes a lot of those ethical and legal disconnects and blind spots, and of course gets hopefully more direct access to you and the information and the learning processes. So let's now push the boundary then, and let's remix this ourselves. That's actually what I want you to do this week. This week I'm going to ask you to push the boundaries legally and ethically, and we're going to do some of our own remixing. So you've read the chapter on property, or you're going to now, after watching this video, read the chapter on property. Then what I want you to do is go back to last week's videos, the videos that your classmates put out last week on privacy. You're going to go and watch a couple of those, as many as you would like. You're going to take one of those videos, and then you are going to remix it with your own ideas from property, and that's the video that you are going to make for this week. So this week you'll make whatever, a 3 to 5 minute video. In that video, you will discuss the ideas raised by the previous person in their privacy video as it connects to your discussion on property itself. And that's what you will turn in this week. So this week you're giving me a remix on privacy through the lens of property with your own ideas added to the ideas of someone else. Thanks so much. Looking forward to seeing your videos this week.